Thank you, Presiding Officer. And twice in the last month, I have been interviewed by young student journalists putting together stories for their degree paper. It's a scenario or an experience I am sure that many members will be familiar with. And of course, it's usually encouraging to see bright, enthusiastic, inquiring minds at the start of what could be a very fulfilling career. And yes, like politicians, journalists too do start off their careers with bright, enthusiastic, inquiring minds. But over this last same month, I have been filled with anxiety. Journalism has always been a difficult profession to enter, but I have been anxious for those youthful prospects. Over the last few weeks, I have also talked to constituents, very much like Dave Whitten and others, who have had 10 or 20 or even 30 years' experience working in journalism, thrown out of their jobs, their pensions threatened or cut by the same employers these young students are looking to find work with. These are difficult times. There are different forces at work affecting the newspaper and media industries, but it is the response of employers to these difficulties that I find most depressing, and which I believe clearly angers most members in the chamber here today. Looking at the print media first, there are certainly few in the industry and beyond who are not acutely aware of falling circulation across the board. Accompanying apparently declining readership has been an equally worrying fall in advertising revenue. The impact of the credit crunch on the motor and property markets, and hence on the revenue pulled in by the motoring and property pages, has merely added towards a pretty dismal economic backdrop. Now, I do not believe it is inevitable, but it is difficult to see that there not being a reduction in the number of Scottish titles. It was pretty grim news when the Herald Group recently cut and merged its production teams. But I believe the way that process was handled verged on the scandalous. There seems to be a return to an old-style macho management by newspaper owners, using the wider economic uncertainty and the lack of job security to flex their management muscles, the bad practice outlined by Mr Russell, and I warmly welcome the Minister's comments condemning this behaviour. Production staff have been cut to the point where I am amazed some papers are making it onto the presses, off the presses every week. And if it was tough for staff at the Herald and Evening Times, Trinity Mirror's attitude to journalists and workers at the Record and Sunday Mail has set a new low. These are not failing newspapers. These are high circulation, highly profitable titles, almost certainly subsidising other papers in the Trinity Mirror group, helping post large profits for that parent group, yet now introducing compulsory redundancies. If this was happening in another industry, it would be headline news in these very papers. It is shameful, it is shameful for the owners and managers of long-established Scottish titles to trade on the loyalty of readers and of its journalists, but to show no such loyalty in return. To turn to the broadcast industries, sorry, Mark, I don't believe I have enough time in this limited debate. To turn to the broadcast industries, it is also deeply worrying to see what is happening. Many of us in Parliament in our recent debate have expressed our fears over the future of STV, and I don't wish to repeat my remarks then, other than to note that as the independent networks shed journalists and cut back on news services, ITV, not STV, but ITV made £311 million profit in 2007, paying £3.8 million in executive pay. And of course, the recent job losses in the BBC could not have come at a worse time. In fact, it is entirely counterproductive for the BBC to be shedding so many staff in Scotland at the very time the corporation is trying to boost production in this country. Most of us here in Parliament have been encouraged by the BBC's very public commitment to Scotland and the obvious difference, for example, we have seen recently in national news coverage of Scottish affairs. But I am sure I am not alone in worrying how is the BBC in Scotland going to take advantage of this policy commitment as they cut their production teams. Presiding Officer, despite a few misplaced remarks, can I broadly welcome the contributions from all sides this morning. What happens to the Scottish newspaper and broadcast industries clearly matters to all of us. Tony Blair once famously described the Scottish press pack as unreconstructed, and I forget the whole of his pithy quote. That was probably the high point of my party's relationship with the press, but none of us in any party or in this chamber have any doubt about the importance of a robust press, a well-read public and reliable objective broadcast media. I am disappointed that the other parties had to try to water down Labour's, or some of the other parties have tried to water down Labour's motion today, but I am encouraged by the otherwise shared concern and common agenda to resist any threat to a healthy and strong newspaper and media industry in Scotland. What has been most worrying in recent days has been the attitude and approach of the owners and managers of media companies. As Hugh Henry put it, they are trying it on. This Parliament needs to reunite around one strong, clear message: no to compulsory redundancies, rethink this confrontational approach, get round the table with the NUG and others, and I urge members to support Labour's motion.